Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton Agenda AWANI secara langsung dari studio AWANI Bukit Kuala Lumpur. Dan malam ini kita raikan kanak-kanak di seluruh dunia, children of the world. And sebelum saya bercakap dalam bahasa Inggeris, saya ingin membawa perhatian kepada bahawa hari ini, Hari Universal untuk kanak-kanak, itu diakui oleh PBB dan UNICEF misalnya, melihat secara khusus. Dan malam ini saya nak ambil keluar aspek UNICEF itu, kerana UNICEF bukan saja hanya melakukan kerja-kerja untuk membantu dalam aspek kemanusiaan terhadap kanak-kanak dan sebagainya, tapi mereka juga diberi pengiktirafan sebagai antara yang paling inovatif dalam melakukannya. Pelbagai inovasi mereka lakukan tanpa mengira halangan yang ada di depan. Dengan itu, I would like to welcome tonight my very great guest to the show, Dr. Sharat Sapra. Thank you so much for making time. You're the director of this Global Innovation Center that looks at children, under UNICEF. And but I met you a few weeks earlier in Dubai, and I had the honor of being in the session before your session, so I stayed true. And I caught a bit of what you said and the other panelists in that show. But what I wanted to link today is, how do we do justice to children of now that will be leaders of tomorrow with the world that we have today, that even though in some places we feel that mankind has come so far, but in other moments and other places we cannot help but feel that we've gone so far backwards, because we can't even protect those who we are supposed to protect, those who cannot fend for themselves, who we are supposed to give tender, loving care, food, shelter, everything else. But sometimes, even to get clear drinking water is a challenge. This is the world that you look at, but I want to take the positives out of it. Even in Dubai, I was so inspired listening to how. And it's true, I guess, when people say that it's always when you are faced with the greatest obstacles that you will rise to the occasion and be innovative about it. So innovation, World Children's Day, and of course the report that's going to be tabled on the State of the World's Children 2015, Reimagining the Future, Innovation for Every Child.
Right. Thank you very much. The Convention on the Rights of the Child is the largest, most ratified convention in the world. All except 3 countries have ratified it. And of those 3, 2 are fragile states. One became independent very recently and is in a conflict situation in Somalia. That convention talks about every child. Now, what has happened is that our strategies in the last few decades have allowed us to take services and benefits from few to many. So if you look at under 5 mortality, that has gone down to less than 6 million children dying, down from about 10 or 12 a few years back. Measles deaths have gone down by more than 90%. But the convention doesn't stop there. The convention says, what about the other 20% who don't have access to services? So the State of the World's Children this time is about those 20%. And how do we address those issues? Because the assumptions on which the strategies are based have changed. Earlier we had, there is no health service, there is no vaccine, there is no doctor. That's no longer true. And still we have 20% that are not reached. So clearly business as usual is not going to give you the answer. Einstein said insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So clearly there is a place for innovation to be brought in, a new way of thinking, a new way of working, so that we reach all those people that we have not yet reached.
In that respect, maybe just to tailor this discussion to the local mood, I'm sure you've gone past the streets of KL, and it's very far detached, maybe from the streets of Juba in southern Sudan. No disrespect to southern Sudan, but we understand the new nation, there's a lot of things, conflicts here and there, still got to be put out. But that doesn't matter to children, because they are there. They're living it. And they're supposed to get what they're supposed to get, but they're not getting it. So if I take if I take the still, areas which are still besorted with conflicts, there's no excuse. I mean, the way that I've read about this and the way that you've presented, I've heard, we can't say, oh, it's a conflict area.
Yeah.
We can't do anything about the kids there, for example.
Yeah.
So I guess this is the mantra
Right.
that has been imbued in what UNICEF is trying to do for the longest time.
Right. So I had the privilege of working in South Sudan before it became independent, and I was working in the southern sector in the rebel-controlled areas. And I fully agree with you. I asked the same question. 17 years of an emergency or conflict is no longer an emergency. It has become a way of life, and we cannot use the excuse of conflict to not provide services to children, and therefore we need to find new ways of doing it.
Okay.
And what has happened since then is the technology has become a major game changer in Africa. There were no banks.
Yeah.
And then if you look at other developed countries or other countries that have been progressing, like Malaysia, you have banks everywhere.
Yeah.
They never had banks. So they immediately innovated into cash transfer using a cell phone.
Okay.
Satellite coverage actually provides connectivity in areas where maybe it won't even make sense for business houses to actually go and build the infrastructure. So what we are finding increasingly is that in many areas, the remoter the area, the more difficult the area, the bigger role technology can actually play in leveling the playing field.
Okay. Doctor, hold your thoughts for a moment. I have to go to the first commercial break, but once we are back, stories about that. Because to you, that experience of banks, for example, people here, some people here would think like, so what's the big deal? If you don't have a bank, but the big deal is, how would the leader of the family, in a lot of cases, which is not the father, because the father will be somewhere, is the mother who looks at the child, and she needs to make decisions.
Right.
And most of the time, it's life-changing decisions, live or die kind of decisions. So we'll get stories from you on the ground on that, and we'll come back after this break. Malam ini penghargaan khas kepada semua anak-anak yang ada di rumah atau di mana juga siaran ini ditonton, dan penghargaan saya juga kepada ibu bapa yang memastikan anak-anak mendapat perlindungan sepenuhnya, bukan saja mengikut undang-undang PBB, tapi mengikut naluri dan juga mengikut budaya yang ada pada kita. In that case, I would like to go, before I go and continue with Dr. Syarat Sapra, I want to go to my colleague Ian. He looks at what's being talked about on social media about this topic. So Ian, if you can please update us.
Betul Kamarul, dan seperti juga apa yang dibincangkan tajuk kita, Imaginasi dan juga Inovasi di media sosial, nampaknya UNICEF bagi tahun ini menggunakan tema #Imagine ataupun lagu yang dipopularkan oleh John Lennon itu sebagai tema untuk menyatu padukan seluruh dunia dan untuk Hari Kanak-Kanak ini. Dan apa yang menarik, inovasi dan teknologi digunakan kali ini ialah menggunakan aplikasi yang dinamakan Touchcast, di mana kita dapat melihat orang ramai dapat menyumbang versi mereka sendiri menyanyi lagu Imagine, lagu John Lennon itu, dan bersama dengan artis-artis Hollywood dan dari seluruh dunia. Kalau kita dapat lihat dalam video klip yang sudah pun diterbitkan, ada artis global terlibat, termasuklah juga daripada Bollywood juga, Priyanka Chopra, dan juga pemenang American Idol Adam Lambert, penyanyi rapper will.i.am, Daniela Mercury, dan juga Idris Elba, pelakon. Dan ini juga kita dapat lihat tweet daripada Katy Perry, duta daripada kepada UNICEF. Dia juga telah tweet dan mempromosi video klip Imagine, dan juga dengan kerjasama Every Voice Counts. Nampaknya ia mendapat sambutan, tapi videonya kita tidak boleh tunjuk sini sebab kita tidak tahu sama ada kita boleh menyiarkan atau tidak. Apapun, video tersebut mendapat sambutan, dan juga ia selain daripada menyanyi dan menyumbang suara untuk lagu Imagine itu, kita dapat saksikan juga Touchcast itu boleh juga orang yang menyumbang derma menerusi aplikasi itu. Nampaknya ini salah satu langkah yang terbaru nampaknya daripada UNICEF untuk menjayakan Hari Kanak-Kanak Sedunia bagi tahun ini. Cam.
Okay, terima kasih banyak Ian. Thank you so much. That was my colleague Ian. He was telling me the wonderful stuff that UNICEF is doing online using the hashtag Imagine and the song Imagine. But that's the thing. The ambassador for UNICEF, all well-known people, but how do we connect them? And UNICEF is good at this, using innovation, creativity to the struggles right at the frontier of the worst places on earth for children in that kind. So if you can share with us the story that I interrupted you from telling before, of like the banking aspect. It's actually not the banking aspect, but the empowerment of that particular family to continue their life, especially when their life has disruptions to it.
So we were talking about banking, and it's something that we all take for granted, that we go out. I mean, when I worked in New York, every block had a bank. Every block had an ATM machine. And so it was very difficult for me to assume that how would you operate without a bank. Going to South Sudan, working in many parts of Africa, even those countries without conflict, there were no banks. Even in Afghanistan, no banks. And so the people were forced, because for every single transaction, the amount of money you had to spend in terms of transport, in terms of time, because the biggest asset a poor person has is time. And every minute that that person spends away from work is less money earned. And so imagine if they had to go maybe a day or so, or a few hours to just go to the nearest bank to do a transaction, or to make payments or withdraw money that their son had sent into the account from outside. It was almost impossible. But with mobile cash, what has happened in the SIM phone, and the beauty is that you don't need a smartphone. You can do it with a very simple phone that only does SMS and voice. That actually revolutionized and changed the life of poor in Africa and in many other parts of the world. And it is an African innovation. We heard iOS 8 now very proudly saying that they can do financial transaction on the phone. Well, Africa had discovered it 15 years back. But what it has done is that it has converted the phone from being just a talking machine to a replacement of transport. So people don't have to then spend time to go to the bank. They can do the transaction on the phone. People can move money to their relatives or pay the school fees on the phones. They don't have to go to a bank, do all that transaction, spend all that time.
Let me layer, sorry to interrupt, but let me layer on top of that. In the conflict situation, for example, you know, even if you keep money with you, it's dangerous.
It is very dangerous.
Right?
Yes.
Even if it's not some other hostile forces coming, maybe a husband wouldn't be as insightful as the wife. That has been proven all across the world. But even in the deepest reaches of the worst places in the world, it's still the mother that will be the most stable in the family. So if the mother have money around, the father might be taking it away. So that innovation also helps solve family and also cultural.
And women, when they have access to money, make smart investments. They would invest in food, they would invest in education, they will invest in health. We men do not always do that. So it's really transformed lives over there. Plus also what it has allowed them to do is get the latest information about the market. What are the food prices somewhere? Earlier middlemen would come and tell them this is the price, and they would not know. So they would sell their goods at a much lower price. Now they get information on their phone.
So it's transparency.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So instead of thinking of this group of people, including children, as just being a group of people to be helped, it's actually a group of people to be empowered. They can help themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you're very right. Most of the work that we do with the principle in mind, that we have to stop looking at women and children as recipients of services. That patron-client relationship, that I have something to give and you have something to receive, has to change.
Okay.
We need to move, and we are very rapidly moving into an era where each of these individuals actually have competencies and intelligence to actually be responsible citizens and contribute to the social development.
That's the point I want to hit home before we close for tonight. I have to go for the last break. Once we are back, to empower, because sometimes there's many kind souls in Malaysia that wants to help. You know, we send money to Cambodia, but let's realign that so that it hits the bullseye, the best maximum contribution, because that might not what the other community wants, you know, but we're thinking that they want it. So how to empower? The structures are already there. It's just the final missing link that we have got to network. What is that? And on top of that, I've always wondered, while we're doing about health and the other things, sometimes it's as if they don't matter at all. Because when armed conflicts happens, then it's sort of throw it back a couple of decades. How do you work with that kind of scenario, especially in Africa? I also want to hear that story from you. I hope we have enough time right after this break. In 2050, we will have about 10 billion people in the world, and maybe more than 2.8 billion of them under 18. Imagine the life of children then, but that should be benchmarked with the life of children now. We've helped millions of children around the world, we as humankind, thanks to organizations like UNICEF, but there are still millions more. And it's not fair for any child to be left behind, no matter where they are, no matter what kind of situation they are in, because the world has progressed. We're thinking of sending people to Mars, and we can't even help one child on Earth. So that's the kind of magnitude that we're talking today for World Universal Children Day. But I want to hear more stories from Dr. Sharat Sapra, who have gone to the worst of places in the world and found strength in even a small child, in the most worst of situation, in the worst of situations. So we talked about money before, but I guess when people with good intentions, sometimes they do things wrongly because they don't know. So what is the kind of support that, you know, normal average person in Kuala Lumpur can do if you want to help children in Africa, for example?
See, whenever a crisis happens, or when people see other people in distress, we are emotionally affected and we want to help. And many times our good intentions end up sending clothes, sending foodstuff, which may not be necessarily what is required at that moment, at that place. And therefore the best way is to find an organization that you believe in, that you trust, give them the resources, and then they can interact with the people on the ground and decide how best to support them. Nowadays, the other thing that is happening is increasingly in cases of emergency, conflict, crisis, or even in normal circumstances in poor families, the trend is to move away from giving things to actually making cash available through mobile transfers to the person themselves. That does a few things. One, the transaction costs are very low because the money is going directly from one point to the other point. Corruption, leakage of funds is almost eliminated. But more importantly, what it allows to happen is that these people, because they have money, they can then choose the things that they need to rebuild their lives. And they might be different from person to person, family to family. What it also does is once the money comes into circulation, local market forces take up. So you find entrepreneurs popping up in Dabab Camp. You see certainly shops coming up, schools being run by the refugees themselves, and people are paying small fees to the teacher. And most importantly, it brings dignity to the rebuilding process, because out of dignity comes freedom.
So it's not true that innovation can only come from high-tech, state-of-the-art laboratories. You have been telling us the stories about that. What more do you want to see in terms of innovation in helping that last mile be close?
Right.
Because maybe if I can ask your kind favor, in even the children themselves, they can actually help themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they hunger for a better condition of living.
So one of the things I always believed in is that if, let's say, 20 years back, someone would have asked me, you can only do one development intervention, what would you do? I would say put a road.
Okay.
Because once the road is there,
Access.
suddenly market forces take over. Today, in this day and age, I would say provide connectivity.
Okay.
Because access to information is the most powerful tool, whether that access to information is for learning or for business or for other purposes, is critical. There are many parts of the world where there are no school teachers, where there are no school books, where there are no schools. Or even if those are there, the quality of teaching and learning is very poor. Today, with this digital age, it is really possible for us to provide quality learning to the remotest part. I mean, imagine just with Skype, if you have connectivity, you can have a teacher sitting in Malaysia teaching a retired school teacher, teaching a kid in Africa, history or geography or one of those subjects. So it is very much possible, and the digital technology allows it to actually empower people to start learning. And once they start learning, they start organizing, and informed communities are actually make informed nations. And informed communities, when they are strong, they actually can influence the whole development process. And then, instead of being recipients, they become actually partners in the national development process.
So sometimes, and also to blame is partly is the media. Like from Africa, we hear more of the stories about child soldiers than the stories about a child that has make innovation and creativity a way out of the situation. So how do you think we can correct this? Would direct point to point, this, like what you said, a teacher here and a group of kids in Juba, for example, talking directly, no inhibitions, would be the way? So
in 2000, when I was in South Sudan, working with the now President Salva Kiir and Dr. Riek Machar, we managed to get, in 2 years, 16,000 child soldiers out of the Sudanese army. That still remains the largest number of child soldiers taken out of the army during a conflict situation. And I'm very proud that I was associated with that exercise. But moving from that, your point was more about how do you then provide power and empower these young people and innovations at the grassroots level. We believe in user-centered innovation. The more you face the challenge, the more you are liable to.
Doctor, you have to come again. Even if you're not in Malaysia, I will hound you to Skype and internet and whatever else that we have, because that's all the time I have, sadly, for tonight. But I think the message is very clear. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to have you here and representing the fight to make better the life of children around the world. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharad, for making time. Hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri tentang perkara ini. Tentunya anda ingin membantu mereka, terutamanya kanak-kanak yang begitu terpinggir sekali di dunia ini, pada pelbagai platform yang Astro AWANI ada, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter dan sebagainya, ataupun terus aplikasi iOS ataupun Android, dan anda boleh menonton dan memberikan pendapat secara langsung di gadget mudah alih anda. Saya akan panjangkan juga kepada UNICEF dan insyaAllah kita akan berjumpa lagi. Sekian, selamat malam, terima kasih. Thank you so much.